155 million years ago, a Jurassic floodplain in what is now Wyoming was home to one of the largest animals ever to walk this planet. Its footsteps left impressions in the ground deep enough to still be found in the rock today, each one a quiet record of something that once moved through this landscape with enough weight to leave a permanent mark on the earth beneath it. The animal responsible weighs nearly 19 tons. Its neck stretches farther than most modern rooms are long. Its tail trails behind it for 40 feet, and at the end of that neck sits a brain roughly the size of a lemon. Scientists named it Brontosaurus, the thunder lizard, a name inspired by a simple idea that the ground itself seemed to tremble beneath its feet. But the deeper scientists looked, the stranger the animal became. To reach its brain, blood had to travel through one of the longest necks ever carried by a land animal. Its skeleton was threaded with air, making an impossible body light enough to move. It swallowed hundreds of kilograms of plants every day without chewing a single bite. And at the end of its body was a tail so long and so flexible that some researchers believe it may have cracked through the air faster than the speed of sound. A newborn Brontosaurus weighed little more than a large dog. An adult could outweigh 3 African elephants combined. Some lived long enough to witness nearly a century of Jurassic history. This was not simply one of the largest animals ever to walk the earth, it was one of the strangest. How did a creature with a brain the size of a lemon support a body this large? How did it feed itself, breathe, move, and survive in a world that seems almost impossible by modern standards? And what did the world actually feel like when an animal this size walked through it? Before we begin, let me know in the comments. Is this your first time finding the channel, or have you been joining these journeys for a while? Now, let's start with the world that made the thunder lizard possible. Before any discussion of giant size, unusual anatomy, or the challenges of sustaining a body measured in dozens of feet, it helps to place Brontosaurus within its family tree. The animal did not appear in isolation. It belonged to a lineage that spent millions of years refining one of the most distinctive body plans ever produced by life on land. Brontosaurus was a sauropod, part of a group of herbivorous dinosaurs, recognized by their long necks, long tails, small heads, and 4 sturdy legs. Sauropods represent the largest land animals known from the fossil record. Across the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, they occupied ecosystems on multiple continents, shaping landscapes through their feeding habits and sheer physical presence. Within this larger group, Brontosaurus belonged to a family known as the Diplodocids. These animals followed a different architectural path from giants such as Brachiosaurus. Their bodies were generally more elongated, with necks extending forward and tails stretching behind in almost equal measure. The overall impression was less like a towering column and more like a living suspension bridge, balanced across an extraordinary horizontal frame. At present, paleontologists recognize 3 species within the genus. The best known is Brontosaurus excelsus, the animal that established the name in popular culture. Alongside it are Brontosaurus parvus and Brontosaurus yanapin. Each possessed subtle differences in proportions and skeletal details, variations that reveal the diversity hidden within a group, often treated as a single familiar dinosaur. These animals lived during the Late Jurassic, between roughly 155 and 152 million years ago, during an interval called the Cambrian. Their remains come from a geological treasure known as the Morrison Formation, a broad sequence of sedimentary rocks extending across much of the western United States. From Montana in the north to New Mexico in the south, this formation preserves one of the richest windows into dinosaur life anywhere on Earth. The name Brontosaurus entered science in 1879 through the work of paleontologist Othniel Charles Marsh. Drawing from Greek roots, he combined words meaning thunder and lizard. The result was a name that endured far beyond scientific debates, carrying an image of immense weight and movement through deep time. Its physical design can be reduced to a few major components. Four column like legs supported a broad torso that housed the digestive machinery required for a plant eating giant. From the front extended a long neck, ending in a surprisingly small skull. Behind stretched an equally impressive tail that balanced the body and completed the animal's silhouette. Everything else flowed from this arrangement. The neck altered feeding possibilities. The tail influenced movement and balance. The compact head reduced weight at the far end of an already lengthy structure. Even the proportions of the limbs reflected the demands imposed by such an elongated frame. In many ways, Brontosaurus can be understood as a single evolutionary idea explored to an extreme degree. Length was added at the front, length was added at the rear, and the rest of the body evolved around that decision. From that foundation emerged one of the most recognizable creatures ever to walk across the surface of the earth. Numbers have a habit of becoming smaller inside the mind. A measurement can be spoken aloud, written in a book, or displayed on a museum plaque, yet still fail to convey its true physical presence. Brontosaurus occupies that difficult territory where ordinary comparison begins to lose its usefulness. From the tip of its snout to the end of its tail, a large Brontosaurus stretched roughly 72 feet. Seen from a distance, such a figure remains abstract. Placed into a familiar setting, the dimensions begin to settle into focus. Two school buses parked end to end would still struggle to match the full length of the animal. The neck reached forward, the tail extended behind, and between them stood a body whose proportions seemed borrowed from imagination, yet emerged through natural history. Mass presents an even greater challenge. Most estimates place adult individuals between 15 and 19 tons, with some specimens potentially surpassing 25 tons. An African bush elephant, the largest land animal alive today, weighs around 6 tons. Three elephants standing together begin to approach the upper range of Brontosaurus. Even then, the comparison remains incomplete because the dinosaur carried that weight across a frame far longer and differently balanced than any mammal alive now. The scale becomes more striking when attention settles on individual body parts. The neck alone measured somewhere between 15 and 20 feet in length. A structure that size exceeds the dimensions of many rooms and stretches farther than many people can accurately judge with a glance. At its far end sat a head surprisingly modest in size, creating a silhouette unlike anything in the modern world. Each step transferred enormous force into the ground. Tracks attributed to large sauropods reveal impressions several feet across, broad enough that a person could stand comfortably within them. Soft sediment preserved these moments, recording the passage of animals whose movement reshaped the surfaces they crossed. What survives in stone today represents only a fraction of the weight those feet once carried. Such dimensions create a chain of consequences. Bone must resist compression, muscles must stabilize movement, lungs must supply oxygen across great distances within the body. Food must travel through an exceptionally long digestive system. Blood must reach tissues located many feet from the heart. Every increase in size adds demands that ripple through the entire organism. This is why Brontosaurus occupies a special place in paleontology. The animal is often introduced as a giant, yet gigantism itself is only the beginning of the story. Physical size functions almost like a force acting upon the body, shaping anatomy at every level. A creature weighing a few hundred kilograms can solve biological challenges one way. A creature weighing many tons faces an entirely different set of constraints. Evolution responded to those constraints, piece by piece across millions of years. The skeleton, respiratory system, digestive tract, and circulatory network all carried the marks of adaptation to extreme scale. Brontosaurus was not merely enlarged. Its body became a collection of interconnected solutions, each one helping support the existence of the others. Seen in that light, the animal becomes something more than a measurement. It becomes a living demonstration of how far life could push the limits of terrestrial size while still remaining functional, mobile, and enduring across generations. Weight is an invisible force until it reaches an extreme. At modest sizes, a skeleton can thicken, muscles can grow stronger, and the body continues functioning without major difficulty. Brontosaurus occupied a different realm entirely. Every additional ton placed greater demands on the framework supporting it, turning the skeleton into one of the central challenges of its existence. If the bones of Brontosaurus had been built as solid structures from end to end, the animal would have carried an extraordinary burden before accounting for muscles, organs, or food. The neck alone would have become a massive load, projecting outward from the torso. Evolution approached this problem with an elegant solution that transformed the architecture of the entire body. Inside many of the vertebrae were networks of chambers connected to an extensive system of air sacs. Paleontologists describe these bones as pneumatized. The word sounds technical, yet the principle is straightforward. Portions of the skeleton contained air-filled spaces woven through the bone itself, reducing weight while preserving structural strength. These cavities were far more sophisticated than a simple hollow tube. Examination of fossil vertebrae reveals intricate internal frameworks, delicate struts and partitions arranged in patterns that distribute stress efficiently. The design resembles engineering techniques used in bridges and aircraft, where material is concentrated where support is needed and removed where it contributes little to strength. This adaptation became especially important in the neck. Diplodocid dinosaurs, including Brontosaurus, carried some of the longest necks ever produced by terrestrial animals. In certain related species, studies suggest that air occupied roughly 60% of the volume within particular cervical vertebrae. A neck extending many feet beyond the body became feasible because much of its interior consisted of open space enclosed by bone. The air sacs connected to those spaces formed part of the respiratory system. Evidence from living birds provides a valuable comparison since birds inherited a version of this arrangement from their dinosaur ancestors. Air moved through a network extending beyond the lungs themselves, reaching regions of the body that mammals never use for respiration. For that reason, the skeleton and the breathing apparatus cannot be separated into different stories. They were linked physically and functionally. Every breath interacted with structures embedded throughout the body, creating a partnership between support and respiration. The same adaptation that reduced mass also influenced how oxygen traveled through the animal. Mammals inhale and exhale through a tidal system, drawing air in and pushing much of the same air back out. The respiratory pattern inferred for Brontosaurus appears more efficient. Air likely flowed in a largely one-directional path, allowing a more continuous exchange of oxygen. Such a design would have been valuable in an animal whose tissues stretched across immense distances. New discoveries continue to reveal how extensive this network may have been. Researchers examining Brontosaurus fossils identified pneumatic cavities within dorsal ribs, indicating that the air sac system reached farther through the torso than earlier reconstructions suggested. Each newly recognized chamber adds another piece to the picture. Seen from the outside, Brontosaurus appeared built from muscle, skin, and bone. Hidden within that frame was another ingredient, Air moved through its body not only as a source of oxygen, but also as a structural element. In a very real sense, part of the animal's skeleton consisted of spaces filled with breath, woven into the foundations of one of Earth's largest land creatures. Among all the bones preserved from Brontosaurus, none have inspired more discussion than the series of vertebrae stretching from its shoulders to its skull. Museums display them, artists reconstruct them, and researchers continue measuring them from new angles, searching for clues about how this extraordinary structure functioned during everyday life. The difficulty begins with posture. A neck measuring roughly 20 feet in length presents possibilities that have occupied paleontologists for decades. Some reconstructions portray it extending forward across the landscape, creating a broad feeding reach close to the ground. Others show the head carried substantially higher, allowing the animal to access vegetation well above its shoulders. Between those positions lies a wide range of intermediate postures, each supported by different interpretations of anatomy and biomechanics. Early 20th century illustrations often favored dramatic elevation. In those images, Brontosaurus appeared almost giraffe like, surveying the world from a great height. As scientific methods became more sophisticated, researchers began examining whether such positions could be maintained comfortably and efficiently. Attention shifted from artistic impressions toward the mechanics of joints, muscles, and living analogs. One influential contribution arrived in 2009 from researchers at the University of Portsmouth. By studying the resting neck positions of modern birds and mammals, they argued that extinct animals may have held their necks differently from what skeletal alignment alone suggests. Their findings indicated that sauropods could potentially raise their heads higher than some strictly horizontal models allowed. The work did not settle the debate, though it expanded the range of plausible postures. Part of the uncertainty comes from the neck itself. Brontosaurus and its close relatives possessed cervical vertebrae that differed noticeably from those of many other diplodocids. The bones were robust, with substantial cervical ribs extending downward beneath the vertebral column. Viewed in cross section, the structure formed a shape closer to a rounded triangle than a simple cylinder. This reinforced design hints at demands extending beyond routine feeding movements. A study published in 2015 introduced a striking possibility. Researchers proposed that the neck's strength may have served an additional purpose connected to competition between individuals. The comparison drew inspiration from modern elephant seals, whose contests involve powerful impacts delivered through the neck and upper body. Under this interpretation, Brontosaurus may have engaged in physical displays or combat in which necks collided during struggles for dominance. Several anatomical features support such speculation. Grooves and troughs associated with the cervical ribs may have helped shield vulnerable soft tissues, including blood vessels and portions of the respiratory tract. Reinforcement in these regions suggests that resisting force was an important consideration during the evolution of the structure. Feeding alone may not fully explain the degree of robustness present in the bones. This possibility transforms the neck from a single purpose tool into something far more versatile. It could have expanded feeding reach, influenced social interactions, supported visual displays, and perhaps absorbed impacts during contests between rivals. Few structures in vertebrate history appear to have carried so many potential roles at once. Despite generations of research, consensus remains elusive. Different lines of evidence point toward different conclusions, and each new study adds another layer to the conversation. The neck of Brontosaurus endures as one of paleontology's most fascinating puzzles, a structure whose bones continue to invite interpretation long after the animal itself vanished from the earth. A drop of blood leaving the heart of Brontosaurus faced a journey unlike almost any found in the animal kingdom. Before it could nourish the brain, it first had to travel through a body built on a scale that pushed against familiar biological limits. Distance alone created a challenge. Height made that challenge even greater. The discussion surrounding neck posture carries enormous importance because circulation obeys the rules of physics. Every foot separating the heart from the brain increases the effort required to move blood upward against gravity. In a creature with a neck extending many feet from the torso, the cardiovascular system becomes one of the most consequential pieces of the entire anatomy. Calculations performed by paleobiologists illustrate the scale of the problem. If Brontosaurus routinely carried its head at the highest positions proposed in some reconstructions, blood would have needed to reach a brain located roughly 20 feet above the heart. Under those circumstances, estimated blood pressure approaches 700 millimeters of mercury. For comparison, a healthy human typically operates near 120 millimeters of mercury. Numbers on paper soon become anatomical consequences. Generating that amount of pressure would require an extraordinarily powerful pump. Some models suggest that the left ventricle alone, only one chamber of the heart, could have approached 2 metric tons in mass if it were built according to the same principles seen in living animals. Such a structure would exceed the size of many entire terrestrial creatures. Energy creates a second obstacle. Hearts are expensive organs. Every contraction consumes fuel, and stronger contractions demand more. Estimates indicate that a heart capable of sustaining those extreme pressures might consume well over half of the animal's total energy budget. Movement, digestion, growth, immune function, and reproduction would all compete for what remained. These considerations explain why many researchers favor lower neck positions during routine activity. A head carried closer to the level of the heart dramatically reduces the pressure required to maintain blood flow. The difference is substantial enough that a change in posture can reshape interpretations of the entire circulatory system. Even so, the puzzle refuses to disappear completely. Some scientists have explored whether Brontosaurus possessed specialized adaptations with no exact modern equivalent. Suggestions include auxiliary pumping mechanisms positioned along the neck, reinforced vessel walls, or muscular valves capable of assisting circulation. Each proposal attempts to bridge the gap between physical requirements and biological feasibility. Living animals provide only limited guidance. The giraffe remains the closest modern comparison because it must supply blood to a head elevated well above the chest. Its heart weighs around 25 pounds and generates blood pressure roughly twice that of many mammals. This achievement is impressive within the context of modern biology, yet it operates on a far smaller scale than the challenges inferred for Brontosaurus. The deeper researchers examine the problem, the more it reveals the extraordinary interconnectedness of the animal's design. Neck posture, blood pressure, heart structure, metabolism, and energy use all influence one another. Altering one variable changes the demands placed upon the rest. For that reason, the circulatory system of Brontosaurus remains one of paleobiology's most enduring mysteries. The bones preserve hints of its existence, while the living machinery that once powered those bones has vanished. Between those fragments of evidence lies a problem still being explored, carried forward by mathematics, anatomy, and careful imagination. At one end of Brontosaurus stood a body measured in tons, supported by powerful limbs and sustained by enormous biological systems. At the other end sat a head whose contents seem almost impossibly modest by comparison. Scale. which had expanded so dramatically throughout the rest of the animal, appeared to stop when it reached the brain. Studies of the skull cavity indicate that the brain of Brontosaurus was roughly the size of a lemon. Within an animal weighing up to 19 tons and extending more than 70 feet in length, that figure feels almost difficult to accept. Few vertebrates display such an extreme contrast between body mass and brain volume. For many decades, scientists believed they had discovered a way around this apparent imbalance. Fossils revealed an enlargement within the spinal region near the hips, a space considerably larger than the cavity that housed the brain itself. Early interpretations suggested the presence of a second brain, an auxiliary control center responsible for coordinating the rear half of the body. The idea captured imaginations and appeared in textbooks, museum exhibits, and popular accounts of dinosaur biology. A creature of such proportions seemed to invite equally unusual solutions. If one brain appeared too small to govern the entire animal, perhaps nature had provided another. As research techniques improved, that interpretation gradually changed. Comparisons with living birds revealed a more likely explanation. The enlarged region near the pelvis closely resembled a glycogen body, a structure associated with energy storage rather than cognition. Modern birds possess a similar feature within the spinal canal, offering a useful anatomical parallel. The revision left Brontosaurus with only one brain, and that brain remained small. Far from creating a problem, this may have represented an advantage. A larger brain demands additional oxygen, nutrients, and blood supply. In an animal already facing substantial circulatory challenges, minimizing the energy requirements of neural tissue could have reduced strain throughout the body. Viewed from this perspective, the dimensions of the brain begin to look less surprising. Evolution does not reward excess. It favors structures that perform necessary functions while avoiding unnecessary costs. If a compact brain could successfully guide movement, feeding, reproduction, and survival, there would be little pressure for it to become larger. This observation also shapes our understanding of Brontosaurus's inner life. The animal almost certainly did not engage in abstract reasoning, long-term planning, or reflective thought in any human sense. Its world was likely organized around sensory information and deeply ingrained behavioral patterns. Movement toward food, responses to environmental changes, avoidance of danger, and participation in social interactions formed the core of its daily experience. That does not imply simplicity in the ordinary sense. Instinct itself is a product of immense evolutionary refinement. The behaviors that carried Brontosaurus through decades of life emerged from countless generations of natural selection, encoded within nervous systems that functioned effectively without requiring elaborate cognition. There is a striking contrast in that arrangement. An animal capable of reaching enormous size, traveling great distances, and surviving for many decades relied on a brain small enough to fit comfortably within a human hand. The imbalance feels unusual only when viewed through human expectations. For Brontosaurus, it was enough. Across millions of years, this compact organ coordinated one of the largest creatures ever to walk on land, guiding a life measured not by intellectual complexity, but by endurance, continuity, and persistence across deep stretches of time. Imagine examining the skull of Brontosaurus for the first time, expecting to find the kind of dental equipment normally associated with an animal of immense size. A body weighing many tons seems as though it should be paired with powerful jaws and broad, grinding teeth. The fossils tell a different story. The mouth of Brontosaurus appears almost minimalist, built with surprising restraint for a creature that depended entirely on plants. Its teeth were narrow, peg-like structures positioned toward the front of the jaws. They lacked the broad chewing surfaces seen in horses, cattle, or many other plant eating animals. There were no molars waiting farther back in the mouth, no elaborate grinding machinery, and no evidence of extensive oral processing. Vegetation entered the digestive system with very little modification beyond being stripped from stems and branches. The arrangement suggests a feeding method based on gathering rather than chewing. As the head moved through patches of vegetation, the teeth functioned like a comb or rake, pulling plant material free in repeated motions. Wear patterns preserved on diplodocid teeth support this interpretation. The teeth appear adapted for cropping and collecting, not crushing or shredding. Once detached, the food was swallowed largely intact. This strategy may seem inefficient from a modern perspective, yet it allowed Brontosaurus to avoid investing heavily in large jaw muscles or a heavy skull. Weight saved at the front of the body carried significant advantages. Every kilogram removed from the head reduced the demands placed upon the neck and the structures supporting it. Daily food requirements remained enormous despite this streamlined approach. Estimates vary, though many studies suggest that a large Brontosaurus may have consumed between 440 and 880 pounds of vegetation each day. Some calculations reach even higher values, depending on metabolic assumptions and food quality. Feeding was therefore not an occasional activity. It likely occupied much of the animal's waking life. The real work of processing that food occurred farther inside the body. After passing through the mouth, plant matter entered an expansive digestive system where microbial communities performed the breakdown that teeth never attempted. Fermentation chambers housed populations of microorganisms capable of extracting nutrients from tough Jurassic vegetation. Time became an important ingredient in the process. Food could remain within the digestive tract for extended periods, while microbial activity gradually released energy. A number of sauropod species may also have swallowed stones known as gastroliths. These stones have been proposed as digestive aids, potentially helping to process plant material through mechanical action inside the gut. Evidence linking this behavior directly to Brontosaurus remains uncertain, and paleontologists continue debating how important gastroliths were within sauropod digestion as a whole. Viewed together, these features reveal a feeding strategy built around efficiency at scale. The skull stayed light, the neck remained mobile, the mouth gathered vegetation rapidly across broad feeding areas. Digestion, entrusted largely to microorganisms, unfolded deep within the torso. The contrast is striking. The head carried only a modest set of simple teeth, while the body behind it functioned as a massive biological processing system. Brontosaurus did not rely on complexity at the point of feeding. It relied on volume, persistence, and a digestive engine capable of turning vast quantities of Jurassic plant life into the fuel required for one of Earth's largest land animals. A modern meadow would have been unrecognizable to Brontosaurus. The familiar green carpet covering much of today's world did not yet exist. Grass, so ordinary in the present day, had not evolved during the Late Jurassic. Entire ecosystems functioned without it, and the great plant eaters of the period built their lives around a very different menu. Across the floodplains and woodlands of the Morrison landscape grew conifers, cycads, ferns, horsetails, and ginkgos. Their forms created a botanical world that would seem unfamiliar to modern eyes. Many lacked flowers. Many reproduced through spores or seeds carried by mechanisms very different from those of contemporary grasses and flowering plants. Through these plant communities moved Brontosaurus, harvesting vegetation on a scale few terrestrial animals have ever matched. Exactly where within this living mosaic it preferred to feed remains a subject of ongoing discussion. The debate circles back to the shape and posture of the neck. If the neck spent much of its time extending forward, Brontosaurus may have specialized in low and intermediate browsing, sweeping broad feeding arcs through dense stands of ferns, young conifers, and cycads. Such a strategy would have allowed enormous quantities of vegetation to be gathered with minimal movement of the body itself. Other interpretations allow for periods of higher browsing. Under these models, the head could occasionally reach elevated branches within conifer canopies, expanding the range of available food. The image recalls modern giraffes feeding among treetops, though the anatomy and mechanics involved were entirely different. In this view, Brontosaurus possessed flexibility in feeding height, shifting according to local conditions and resource availability. The teeth provide valuable clues. Studies examining wear patterns in diplodocid teeth reveal signs consistent with contact against vegetation carrying grit and soil particles. Tiny scratches and abrasions suggest frequent interaction with plants growing close to the ground. Such evidence does not eliminate higher feeding entirely, though it does support the idea that low browsing formed a substantial part of daily life. Age likely influenced these feeding habits as well. Young Brontosaurus occupied a different physical world from fully grown adults. Their smaller bodies and shorter necks opened access to resources less practical for mature individuals. Paleontologists refer to this pattern as ontogenetic niche partitioning. Different age groups exploited different portions of the environment, reducing competition among members of the same species. The consequences extended beyond feeding itself. A herd moving steadily through a landscape would alter the vegetation around it. Branches were stripped, plants were consumed before reaching maturity. Soil became compressed beneath repeated footsteps. Openings appeared within dense growth, changing patterns of sunlight and influencing which species flourished afterward. These effects accumulated across seasons and generations. The influence of Brontosaurus reached beyond its own survival and shaped the structure of the ecosystem around it. Modern ecologists use the term ecosystem engineer for organisms that modify their environment in significant ways. Beavers achieve this through dams. Elephants do so by reshaping forests and grasslands. Brontosaurus operated on a scale even larger. Every feeding decision altered the distribution of plant life. Every movement redirected ecological relationships. The forests and floodplains of the Morrison Formation were not merely places where these animals lived. They were landscapes continuously molded by the presence of giants, their feeding habits woven into the growth and renewal of the Jurassic world. The bones of Brontosaurus tell only part of the story. To understand the animal fully, it helps to look beyond the skeleton and toward the landscape that sustained it. Every creature is shaped by the world around it, and few prehistoric environments have revealed themselves in greater detail than the Morrison Formation. Today, the Morrison appears as layers of rock spread across the western United States. The formation stretches from Montana in the north to New Mexico in the south, crossing 13 states and preserving one of the richest dinosaur records ever discovered. Within those rocks lies a snapshot of life from approximately 155 million years ago, captured during the Late Jurassic. At that time, the region looked very different from the modern American West. Dry deserts and rugged mountain scenery had not yet taken their familiar form. Much of the landscape consisted of broad floodplains crossed by rivers that shifted with the seasons. Water flowed through channels that migrated across the terrain, depositing sediment and nourishing extensive plant communities. To the east, a shallow inland sea influenced regional climate and contributed moisture to the environment. Global temperatures were somewhat warmer than those of the present day, by roughly 3 degrees Celsius on average. Seasonal variation remained important. Periods of rainfall alternated with drier intervals, creating cycles that influenced vegetation growth and animal movement. Water sources expanded and contracted throughout the year, shaping migration routes and feeding opportunities across the region. Within this setting lived an extraordinary concentration of giant herbivores. Brontosaurus shared its world with Diplodocus, Camarasaurus, Brachiosaurus, Supersaurus, and several other sauropods. Each species occupied its own ecological role, drawing resources from different portions of the landscape. Their coexistence represents one of the most remarkable examples of large animal diversity known from the fossil record. The Morrison supported more than sauropods. Stegosaurus moved among stands of vegetation, carrying its distinctive plates above the surrounding foliage. Camptosaurus browsed nearby. Pterosaurs traveled through the skies overhead, crossing river systems and open plains. Small reptiles, amphibians, mammals, insects, and countless other organisms filled ecological spaces that rarely receive the same attention as the giants. Predators formed another important component of the ecosystem. Allosaurus dominated the carnivore community and appears with striking frequency in Morrison fossils. Estimates suggest that it accounts for roughly 70 to 75% of known theropod remains from the formation. Its presence was reinforced by other large hunters, including Ceratosaurus, Torvosaurus, and Saurophaganax. Together, they formed a predator guild unlike anything existing today. One aspect of the Morrison continues to attract scientific interest. The landscape supported enormous quantities of animal biomass, despite existing within what is often described as a semi-arid environment. Multiple giant herbivores lived alongside multiple giant carnivores, all drawing energy from the same broad ecosystem. Researchers continue exploring how this balance was maintained. Productive river corridors, seasonal plant growth, efficient feeding strategies, and ecological specialization likely contributed pieces of the solution. Whatever the combination, the result was a landscape capable of sustaining one of the richest dinosaur communities ever known. For Brontosaurus, the Morrison Formation was more than a place on a map. It was the stage upon which every aspect of its life unfolded, a dynamic world of rivers, seasons, vegetation, and giants moving together across deep Jurassic time. Every landscape that produces great herbivores also produces something willing to hunt them. In the Morrison Formation, that role belonged to Allosaurus, a predator whose presence appears again and again in the fossil record. Wherever the bones of giant plant eaters are found, the shadow of this carnivore is rarely far away. Adult Allosaurus reached lengths of roughly 30 to 40 feet and weighed as much as 2 tons. Its skull carried rows of serrated teeth designed for slicing flesh, and its body combined strength with agility in a way that made it one of the dominant predators of the late Jurassic. Fossil discoveries suggest it was extraordinarily common. Among large meat-eating dinosaurs from the Morrison ecosystem, Allosaurus appears with striking frequency. Evidence of encounters between predators and sauropods survives in the bones themselves. Paleontologists have documented Allosaurus bite marks on sauropod fossils recovered from Morrison deposits. These marks provide direct proof that the predator interacted with giant herbivores. Some injuries may reflect active attacks, while others could represent scavenging after death. Either way, The two animals occupied the same ecological stage and regularly crossed paths. Despite its formidable reputation, Allosaurus faced limitations. A fully grown Brontosaurus represented an immense challenge. At approximately 19 tons, the dinosaur outweighed its predator many times over. Bringing down such an animal would have carried substantial risk. Even a successful attack could result in severe injury to the hunter. Size, therefore, became the first line of defense. As Brontosaurus matured, it gradually moved beyond the range of prey most predators could realistically subdue. Large adults likely enjoyed a degree of security unavailable to smaller animals sharing the same environment. Their greatest danger came during the years before reaching full size. Young Brontosaurus occupied a very different position within the ecosystem. Hatchlings and juveniles lacked the immense mass that protected mature individuals. Their bodies remained manageable targets for carnivores, making early life a period of heightened vulnerability. Rapid growth, already important for many biological reasons, carried an additional advantage by reducing the amount of time spent within this dangerous size range. Physical defenses may also have played a role. The tail extended far behind the body and contained substantial musculature near its base. Even without invoking the most extreme interpretations of tail performance, a powerful sideways strike would have created a serious obstacle for any approaching predator. Distance itself became part of the weapon. An attacker had to navigate a long radius around the animal before reaching more vulnerable areas. Group movement may have added another layer of protection. Fossil trackways preserve occasions when large and small sauropods traveled together in parallel directions. Such evidence cannot reveal social behavior in complete detail, yet it suggests that individuals of different sizes sometimes moved as part of the same broader assemblage. Larger animals positioned around younger members would have created a formidable living barrier. Across millions of years, these interactions shaped both species. Predators evolved strategies for locating and exploiting weaknesses. Herbivores evolved structures, behaviors, and growth patterns that improved survival. Neither side remained static. The relationship between Brontosaurus and Allosaurus was therefore more complex than a simple hunter pursuing prey. Each existed within the evolutionary influence of the other, connected through a long history of adaptation, written into bone, movement, and survival across the Jurassic world. Far behind the torso, beyond the powerful hips and the immense sweep of the body, Brontosaurus carried a structure that seems almost improbable when viewed in isolation. The tail stretched for roughly 40 feet, beginning as a thick, muscular extension of the spine and narrowing gradually until it ended in a slender tip. Seen as a whole, it formed nearly half the length of the animal itself, a living cable of bone, tendon, and muscle trailing across the Jurassic landscape. At first glance, such a tail appears to serve an obvious purpose. A long neck projecting forward creates balance problems, and a long tail extending rearward helps distribute weight across the body. For many years, this explanation dominated scientific thinking. The tail functioned as a counterweight, stabilizing the animal as it moved and fed. That role remains important, yet closer study revealed a structure far more complex than a simple balancing device. The vertebrae changed shape along the tail's length. Near the base, they were large and robust, capable of anchoring substantial musculature. Progressively farther back, each vertebra became smaller and lighter. By the final portion, the tail transformed into something resembling a gigantic biological whip. This unusual architecture encouraged researchers to ask whether movement itself might have been one of the tail's primary functions. During the 1990s, a team that included Nathan Mervold constructed a quarter-scale model of a diplodocid tail. Using detailed anatomical measurements, the researchers attempted to understand how the structure behaved when accelerated through space. Their experiments produced an unexpected result. Under certain conditions, the tip of the model appeared capable of exceeding the speed of sound, generating a crack comparable to that produced by a bullwhip. If such behavior occurred in a living Brontosaurus, the sound would have been extraordinary. Estimates suggested a report exceeding 200 decibels, comparable to the discharge of heavy artillery. Across a floodplain populated by giant animals, that noise could have traveled immense distances, cutting through wind, vegetation, and the constant sounds of Jurassic life. Subsequent research introduced caution into the discussion. Computer simulations indicated that repeated supersonic motion might impose stresses capable of damaging soft tissues or skeletal elements near the tail tip. Some investigators concluded that the structure may not have tolerated such forces regularly. Others argued that occasional high-speed movements remained possible. The debate continues because fossilized bone preserves shape while leaving many details of muscle, tendon elasticity, and connective tissue open to interpretation. Even without crossing the sound barrier, the tail remains an impressive mechanical instrument. A 40-foot structure, driven by powerful muscles, could deliver substantial force. Any predator approaching from behind would have encountered a moving barrier capable of striking from considerable distance. Defensive use fits naturally within the broader anatomy of an animal whose survival often depended on discouraging attack before physical contact became unavoidable. Communication offers another intriguing possibility. A loud crack could have carried information across large areas, allowing individuals to signal location, strength, or reproductive condition. Dominance displays may have relied on sound as much as physical confrontation. Some paleontologists have even suggested that distinctive features in the final vertebrae hint at specialization for such behaviors. Whether the tail ever achieved true supersonic speed remains uncertain. Its significance does not depend on a final verdict. What survives in the fossil record is a structure unlike anything carried by a modern land animal, a remarkable extension of the spine that transformed motion into force, sound, and presence across the world of Brontosaurus. A footprint survives long after a body has vanished. Across parts of the former Morrison landscape, stone still preserves the paths of animals that crossed wet ground 155 million years ago. Those impressions reveal something important about Brontosaurus. For all its immense size, it was an animal built for movement. Transporting 19 tons across a floodplain posed challenges that few land animals in Earth's history have ever faced. Gravity acted on every kilogram. Each step transferred enormous forces through bone, muscle, and connective tissue. Any weakness in the system would have been magnified thousands of times each day. The body plan of Brontosaurus reflects a solution refined over millions of years, one that balanced weight, stability, and efficiency with extraordinary precision. The legs formed the foundation of that solution. Unlike the limbs of a predator built for speed or sudden turns, Brontosaurus possessed columnar limbs arranged almost directly beneath the body. Their geometry resembles the support structures of large buildings more than the limbs of most animals. Weight traveled downward through near vertical pathways, minimizing bending stresses and reducing the amount of muscular effort required to remain upright. Each limb contained massive bones capable of resisting compression. The arrangement allowed the skeleton to function as a framework carrying the body's load, while muscles guided motion rather than constantly fighting gravity. Engineers studying large structures often encounter the same principle. Loads are easiest to manage when they move through straight supportive columns. Evidence from trackways suggests that Brontosaurus advanced with a measured gait. The hind feet commonly landed slightly ahead of, or close beside, the impressions left by the forefeet. Such placement distributed forces smoothly through the body and reduced unnecessary energy expenditure. Every movement appears optimized for endurance rather than speed. Current estimates place walking speed for large sauropods between roughly 2 and 4 miles per hour. That pace may sound modest, yet it was entirely adequate for an herbivore feeding throughout the day. Covering ground efficiently mattered more than rapid acceleration. A body of this scale benefited from consistency. Small savings in energy, repeated over decades, became biologically significant. Traditional running was probably beyond the practical limits of Brontosaurus. Biomechanical models indicate that lifting all 4 feet from the ground at once would have generated substantial stresses throughout the skeleton. The energetic cost would also have been immense. Movement therefore relied on steady progression, with at least 1 foot maintaining contact with the earth at virtually all times. The footprints themselves provide a glimpse of the forces involved. Some preserved impressions measure 3 to 4 feet across. Each step compressed sediment deeply enough to leave traces that survived burial, fossilization, uplift, and erosion. Millions of years later, those tracks still mark the passage of animals whose weight reshaped the ground beneath them. Movement on this scale also influenced the surrounding environment. Repeated travel along preferred routes compacted soil and altered vegetation patterns. Seasonal journeys following water sources and productive feeding areas may have connected distant regions of the Morrison ecosystem. Many paleontologists consider such migrations plausible, particularly in landscapes shaped by alternating wet and dry periods. Viewed from a distance, a herd of Brontosaurus would not have appeared fast. Speed was never the defining feature. Their achievement lay elsewhere. These animals transformed immense mass into sustainable motion, carrying bodies the size of living monuments across a changing Jurassic world year after year, step after deliberate step. Sound leaves no fossil. Bones can survive for 150 million years, teeth can harden into stone, and footprints can remain pressed into rock long after the animal itself is gone. A voice vanishes the instant it is made. For that reason, the acoustic world of Brontosaurus remains one of the most elusive subjects in paleontology. Even so, the anatomy preserved in fossils offers clues about the kinds of sounds such an animal may have produced and perceived. The starting point is scale. Brontosaurus possessed a body unlike anything alive today, with an immense respiratory system connected to air sacs extending through much of the skeleton. Air moving through such a structure would have interacted with chambers, passages, and cavities distributed across the neck and torso. In living animals, anatomy shapes sound. The dimensions of a vocal tract influence pitch, resonance, and carrying distance. The same physical principles applied in the Jurassic. Its neck may have played a particularly important role. Extending many feet beyond the torso, it created a long, resonating pathway through which sound could travel. Researchers have compared this possibility to the behavior of large wind instruments. Longer air columns naturally favor deeper frequencies. If Brontosaurus vocalized using structures associated with the respiratory tract, the resulting sounds may have occupied very low ranges. Evidence from dinosaur hearing supports this idea. Studies examining inner ear anatomy across various dinosaur groups indicate sensitivity to lower frequencies. Such sounds possess useful properties in large landscapes. They travel farther than high frequencies, bend around obstacles more effectively, and lose energy more gradually across distance. Forests, floodplains, and river corridors all transmit low frequency signals efficiently. Modern elephants provide an intriguing comparison. Their infrasonic calls travel over considerable distances and can sometimes be detected more through vibration than through conventional hearing. A similar communication strategy would have suited large sauropods well. Members of a dispersed herd could remain aware of one another even when separated by vegetation, terrain, or distance. The respiratory system itself may have amplified these effects. Air sacs are already known to have contributed to breathing efficiency and skeletal lightening. Some researchers suggest they may also have influenced sound production by creating additional resonating spaces connected to the lungs and airways. A call passing through such a network could emerge deeper, richer, and more powerful than one generated by a simpler respiratory arrangement. Communication likely involved more than vocalization alone. The tale discussed earlier introduces another acoustic dimension. A powerful crack produced by rapid tail movement would differ completely from a low rumble emerging from the respiratory tract. One sound carried sustained information through resonance. The other delivered an abrupt percussive signal capable of attracting attention immediately. Together, they could have formed complementary components of social behavior. A gathering of Brontosaurus may therefore have generated an acoustic environment unlike any modern ecosystem. Deep vibrations rolling across the landscape, occasional resonant calls, and sudden explosive reports from moving tails would have blended into a distinctive auditory backdrop. The experience may have been felt through the ground as much as heard through the air. Absolute certainty remains beyond reach because the soft tissues responsible for vocalization have long since disappeared. Yet the physics of the body remains preserved in stone. From those surviving clues emerges a picture of an animal whose world was filled with sound, carried across Jurassic distances by anatomy built on a truly monumental scale. The life of a Brontosaurus began inside an object surprisingly modest in size. After spending time among creatures measured in tons and decades, it is easy to imagine equally gigantic eggs scattered across the Jurassic landscape. The fossil evidence tells a different story. Even the largest sauropods emerged from eggs that would appear almost ordinary beside the immense adults they eventually became. This limitation arose from the physics of eggshells themselves. As eggs increase in size, their shells must also become thicker to support the growing weight. At a certain point, thickness creates a new problem. Oxygen can no longer move efficiently through the shell and into the developing embryo. Growth reaches a biological ceiling. The largest land animals in Earth's history, therefore, began life inside eggs, roughly comparable in size to a football or a large cantaloupe. Across suitable nesting grounds, females likely deposited multiple eggs in clutches. Direct Brontosaurus nests remain unknown, yet discoveries from related sauropods provide valuable clues. Some nesting sites suggest eggs may have been laid in relatively simple arrangements without extensive parental construction. In certain interpretations, females may even have released eggs while moving through nesting areas, producing broad fields of scattered offspring rather than carefully maintained nests. Once buried, the eggs depended on environmental warmth. Temperatures estimated between approximately 82 and 88 degrees Fahrenheit appear consistent with successful development. Heat could come from sun-warmed soil, moist sediment, or decomposing vegetation. The surrounding ground became an incubator, maintaining conditions suitable for embryonic growth over extended periods. Eventually, a hatchling emerged. The contrast between beginning and ending stages of life remains one of the most extraordinary features of Brontosaurus biology. A newborn may have weighed only 10 to 15 pounds. Compared with a future adult weighing 19 tons, the difference seems almost impossible to reconcile. The same species occupied two entirely different worlds depending on age. For a hatchling, the Morrison ecosystem was filled with hazards. Small size brought advantages such as agility and reduced food requirements, yet it also placed young animals within the prey range of numerous predators. An adult Allosaurus that would hesitate before confronting a mature Brontosaurus could view a juvenile very differently. Carnivorous reptiles, smaller theropods, and opportunistic scavengers all represented potential threats. Survival depended on navigating this dangerous interval between hatching and adulthood. Growth provided the path forward, though reaching safer sizes required years. During that period, mortality was almost certainly high. Many young individuals likely disappeared long before approaching maturity, a reality reflected across modern animal populations as well. Evidence from some sauropod bone beds hints that juveniles may have remained associated with older animals. Fossils cannot reveal family bonds directly, yet the recurring presence of different age classes within shared deposits suggests some level of proximity. Large adults moving nearby would have created a degree of protection through size alone. Predators confronting a group faced risks absent when targeting isolated young. Age transformed nearly every aspect of Brontosaurus life. Hatchlings occupied ecological roles closer to those of medium-sized animals than giant herbivores. Their feeding habits, movement patterns, and vulnerabilities differed substantially from those of mature individuals. As growth progressed, each stage opened new opportunities while closing old dangers. The result was a life cycle spanning an astonishing range of body sizes. From a creature light enough to fit comfortably in human arms, emerged an animal capable of reshaping vegetation, influencing landscapes, and standing among the largest terrestrial organisms ever known. A Brontosaurus hatchling entered life, carrying a problem measured in years. Its world was filled with dangers that scarcely noticed fully grown adults, yet could easily overwhelm a juvenile only beginning its journey. Survival depended on crossing an immense gulf between vulnerability and safety, and evolution provided an answer unlike almost anything seen among land animals. The evidence comes from bone histology, the microscopic study of fossilized bone tissue. When paleontologists cut thin sections from sauropod bones and examine them under magnification, they find a record of growth preserved within the structure itself. The story written there is striking. These animals did not spend decades inching toward adulthood through the gradual pattern often associated with modern reptiles. Their bones reveal an organism growing with extraordinary speed. Young Brontosaurus individuals appear to have gained mass at rates comparable to large mammals and birds. During peak growth, some estimates suggest weight increases exceeding a ton each year. Such numbers become easier to appreciate when viewed across a short span of time. A hatchling weighing little more than a household pet could transform into a creature weighing several tons within only a few years. The pace reshaped nearly every aspect of its existence. This rapid expansion demanded enormous biological investment. Building muscle, bone, organs, and connective tissue at such rates required a constant flow of energy and nutrients. The skeleton preserves evidence of that effort. Juvenile sauropods possessed fibrolamellar bone, a tissue type associated with sustained, accelerated growth. The same pattern appears in fast-growing mammals and birds today. Its presence in Brontosaurus fossils provides strong evidence that these dinosaurs maintained metabolic activity far above that of modern cold blooded reptiles. As a result, many researchers view sauropods as animals operating somewhere along the spectrum between traditional reptilian and mammalian physiology. Their bodies generated growth rates difficult to reconcile with a sluggish metabolism. Each year represented a race toward a size where predators became less threatening and survival probabilities improved dramatically. The ecological advantages of rapid growth were substantial. An Allosaurus, capable of targeting a small juvenile, would face a very different challenge a few years later. Every increase in body mass reduced the number of predators able to inflict serious harm. Size functioned as armor, and growth functioned as the process of forging it. For a young Brontosaurus, becoming larger was not merely development, it was the central task around which early life revolved. Research suggests that near adult dimensions may have been reached in approximately 15 years. For an animal ultimately stretching across an entire grove of trees, that timetable is astonishingly brief. The period of explosive expansion eventually came to an end, however. Growth did not stop completely, but its tempo changed. The frantic accumulation of mass gave way to a slower pattern that could continue for decades. The contrast between these life stages reveals something fundamental about Brontosaurus. Youth was defined by urgency, written into bone and flesh. Adulthood unfolded at a different rhythm, one measured less by rapid transformation and more by endurance. The same animal that spent its early years growing with exceptional speed could later spend decades inhabiting the landscape it had worked so hard to reach. Time leaves marks in bone just as seasons leave marks in wood. Deep within the fossilized skeletons of sauropods, paleontologists have found microscopic records of growth preserved across entire lifetimes. These structures, known as growth rings, provide one of the clearest windows into how long an animal, such as Brontosaurus, may have remained alive. Each ring represents a change in growth rate, often linked to seasonal cycles and shifts in resource availability. By examining these patterns and comparing them with growth rates observed in living animals, researchers can estimate age at different stages of life. The picture that emerges is striking. Brontosaurus appears to have been an animal capable of extraordinary longevity, with many estimates suggesting lifespans ranging from roughly 70 years to more than 100 years. Such numbers become especially remarkable when placed beside the growth story already written into its bones. Within approximately 15 years, a young Brontosaurus could approach adult size. Most mammals that grow rapidly also age rapidly. Brontosaurus followed a different path. After an early period of intense expansion, life stretched onward for decades. The majority of its existence unfolded after adulthood had already been reached. Imagine the rhythm of those years. Seasons cycled across the Morrison landscape. Rivers shifted channels. Plant communities expanded and contracted with changing rainfall. Predators appeared and vanished. Through all of it, a mature Brontosaurus continued its steady passage, feeding, traveling, resting, and feeding again. Day after day blended into years, and years accumulated into spans of time difficult for the human mind to grasp. A Brontosaurus, born during one period of the Late Jurassic, could still be moving across familiar floodplains when entire generations of smaller animals had already come and gone. Predators such as Allosaurus lived far shorter lives. Many individuals would have appeared, hunted, reproduced, and disappeared, while the same adult sauropod remained part of the landscape. In that sense, A large Brontosaurus was almost a permanent feature of its environment, as enduring as a grove of trees or a river crossing. This longevity raises an intriguing possibility regarding herd life. Although there is no evidence for complex memory or abstract reasoning comparable to that of humans, experience still accumulates in living creatures. Repeated journeys create familiar routes. Seasonal movement becomes established through repetition. Locations associated with water, shelter, or abundant vegetation can become embedded in behavior across decades. The oldest animals within a group may therefore have carried a form of practical knowledge expressed through movement itself. They did not need maps, plans, or conscious reflection. Survival patterns reinforced over many years could guide decisions automatically, shaping where a herd traveled and how it responded to changing conditions. The landscape became written into behavior through repetition and endurance. By the time a Brontosaurus approached the end of its life, it had survived droughts, floods, injuries, competition, and predation pressures across an immense stretch of time. Few terrestrial animals in Earth's history are thought to have combined such great size, such rapid early growth, and such extended longevity. A century-old Brontosaurus represented more than biological success. It stood as the product of countless seasons endured, a living archive of survival carried forward through one of the longest lives ever achieved by a land animal. A footprint can preserve more than the passage of a single animal. Sometimes it preserves a relationship. Across scattered corners of the world, paleontologists have uncovered trackways where multiple sauropods move together, their paths aligned, their pace coordinated, their journeys briefly recorded in mud before time transformed those impressions into stone. Among the most compelling examples comes from the Arabian Peninsula. There, a remarkable site preserves 11 parallel, quadrupedal trackways extending across an ancient surface. Large individuals traveled alongside smaller ones, all moving in the same general direction. The scene lasted only a short moment in Jurassic terms, yet it provides one of the clearest glimpses into how giant dinosaurs may have organized themselves while crossing the landscape. Trackways alone cannot reveal emotions, family bonds, or social intentions. They cannot tell us whether individuals recognized one another or maintained long-term associations. What they do reveal is coordination. A group of enormous animals moving together requires shared timing and shared direction. The pattern becomes difficult to explain as mere coincidence when multiple track makers leave parallel routes across the same stretch of ground. Additional clues emerge from bone beds, sites where numerous sauropod remains occur together. Some accumulations may represent drought events, floods, or other environmental circumstances that brought animals into the same place. Even with those possibilities considered, the repeated appearance of multiple individuals preserved near one another suggests that gathering in groups occurred at least occasionally during life. Certain bone bed discoveries offer another intriguing detail. In some cases, individuals appear clustered by age. Younger animals are found together, while larger adults occur in separate concentrations. This pattern resembles age segregation seen in several modern large herbivores. Such organization can reduce competition and allow animals with similar nutritional needs or movement abilities to remain together. Feeding ecology may have reinforced this arrangement. Earlier evidence suggests that different age classes likely exploited different parts of the environment. Smaller individuals could browse vegetation inaccessible or unimportant to adults. Larger animals could reach feeding zones beyond the capabilities of juveniles. By dividing resources across body sizes, A herd could support many members without every animal competing for the same plants. Protection may have been another advantage. A mature Brontosaurus occupied a size category that few predators could challenge successfully. Juveniles existed in a very different reality. For them, danger arrived more frequently and from a wider range of threats. Within a group, smaller members benefited from proximity to animals whose sheer mass discouraged attack. A ring of adults surrounding younger individuals would create a formidable barrier without requiring specialized defensive behavior. Movement across the Morrison landscape may also have operated at the group level. Seasonal rainfall influenced vegetation growth, river flow, and access to resources. Coordinated travel would allow large populations to track favorable conditions across broad areas. Trails established through repeated use could become familiar routes followed year after year. Even so, uncertainty remains. The fossil record excels at preserving motion while revealing little about motivation. We can see lines of travel, clusters of bones, and patterns of age distribution. We cannot directly observe the relationships behind them. Brontosaurus may have formed close-knit family groups, loose aggregations, or social structures unlike anything alive today. What survives is the shape of collective movement, immense bodies traveling together across a changing world, leaving behind evidence that life for these giants was often lived in company rather than alone. A modern observer standing within the Morrison ecosystem would face a challenge of scale. Brontosaurus was immense, yet it was only one member of a community filled with other gigantic herbivores. Across floodplains, woodlands, river margins, and fern-covered clearings moved a collection of animals so large and so numerous that no modern landscape offers a true comparison. Brontosaurus shared this world with Diplodocus, Camarasaurus, Brachiosaurus, Barosaurus, Supersaurus, and additional sauropods whose remains still emerge from Morrison rocks today. At first glance, such coexistence appears impossible. A single giant herbivore requires extraordinary amounts of vegetation. Several giant species living together should have exhausted their resources rapidly. The fossil record suggests something very different occurred. The key appears to be ecological partitioning. Rather than competing directly for identical food sources, these animals divided the landscape according to feeding strategy, anatomy, and body design. Their differences were subtle compared with the distinctions between modern elephants and giraffes, yet those differences mattered enormously when multiplied across thousands of feeding hours and millions of years. Brachiosaurus provides one of the clearest examples. Its front limbs were longer than its hind limbs, giving the body a forward-tilted posture and positioning the neck at a naturally elevated angle. This configuration likely allowed access to vegetation high within conifer canopies. While other herbivores fed closer to the ground, Brachiosaurus could exploit a feeding zone largely unavailable to them. Diplodocus occupied a different niche. Its neck was typically held in a more horizontal orientation, and its narrow skull carried teeth concentrated near the front of the jaws. Evidence suggests feeding focused on lower vegetation, including plants growing near ground level. Such specialization reduced overlap with species browsing higher in the environment. Brontosaurus appears to have occupied an intermediate position. Its anatomy suggests flexibility across a broader vertical range than some of its relatives. Feeding likely occurred among shrubs, cycads, young conifers, and other vegetation positioned between the lowest browsing zone and the upper canopy. This placement helped separate it from neighboring giants while still granting access to abundant food resources. The result was a layered feeding system extending from the ground upward, through multiple levels of vegetation. Modern African savannas provide a distant parallel where different herbivores consume resources at different heights. In the Morrison, however, the participants were far larger and the scale far greater. Entire forests were effectively divided into feeding bands occupied by different dinosaur species. Such partitioning allowed the ecosystem to support an astonishing concentration of biomass. No living environment contains an equivalent gathering of giant herbivores. Even the largest modern mammal communities fall far short of the total mass represented by Morrison sauropods. Their presence influenced nearly every aspect of the landscape around them. Repeated movement created corridors through vegetation. Feeding altered the shapes of plant communities. Soil became compressed along frequently traveled routes. Trees experienced browsing pressure at specific heights depending on which species occupied a given area. Across thousands of years, the activities of these animals shaped the environment as profoundly as rivers and seasonal weather patterns. Brontosaurus was not the largest resident of this world. Supersaurus and perhaps Amphicoelias may have exceeded it in overall size, yet numerical dominance often matters as much as physical dimensions. Brontosaurus appears to have been among the more common large herbivores in the ecosystem, making it one of the principal architects of the Morrison landscape and one of the most influential animals of its age. Imagine the neck once more, though viewed through a different lens. For much of this journey, it has served as a feeding structure, a bridge between body and food source, a biological solution to reaching vegetation spread across the Jurassic landscape. Yet, anatomy can carry more than one purpose, and some researchers have proposed that the Brontosaurus neck may have played another role entirely. Interest in this possibility intensified after a study published in 2015 examined the cervical anatomy of Brontosaurus and its close relative, Apatosaurus. The investigation focused on the cervical ribs, elongated bony structures running beneath the neck vertebrae. What emerged was an unexpected pattern. These ribs appeared exceptionally robust, stronger than many researchers would expect if their only purpose involved supporting the neck during feeding. Their arrangement also attracted attention. The cervical ribs projected downward, creating a subtriangular cross-section along much of the neck. From an engineering perspective, such a shape resists forces differently from a simple cylindrical structure. Loads arriving from the side or from below can be distributed more effectively through the framework. That observation encouraged researchers to ask whether the neck might have experienced stresses beyond the routine demands of browsing vegetation. Comparisons with living animals offered one possible clue. Male elephant seals engage in dramatic contests during the breeding season, striking rivals with reinforced necks and upper bodies. Victory grants access to mating opportunities, making physical competition an important evolutionary force. The two animals differ enormously in form and ancestry, yet the principle remains relevant. Repeated combat can shape anatomy in distinctive ways. Under the neck combat hypothesis, male Brontosaurus may have swung their necks against one another during dominance encounters. No horns crowned the skull. No sharp claws existed for ritualized combat. The neck itself, stretching for roughly 20 feet and powered by substantial musculature, could have served as the primary instrument of impact. Each strike would involve tremendous momentum generated by a structure already carrying considerable mass. Additional features seem consistent with this interpretation. Between the cervical ribs lay ventral troughs that may have sheltered delicate soft tissues, including major blood vessels and the trachea. Protective arrangements of this kind become especially valuable if impacts occasionally occurred. Evolution tends to reinforce regions exposed to repeated mechanical stress, and the neck of Brontosaurus shows several characteristics that continue to invite discussion. None of this transforms the hypothesis into established fact. Fossils preserve bone, while behavior vanishes almost completely after death. No skeleton records the exact circumstances under which its owner lived, fed, displayed, or competed. Scientists therefore work from anatomy, biomechanics, and comparison, assembling possibilities from physical evidence scattered across stone. Even with that uncertainty, the idea remains compelling because it suggests competing evolutionary demands acting upon the same structure. A neck efficient for feeding would maximize access to vegetation. A neck useful in combat would benefit from strength, reinforcement, and impact resistance. Natural selection may have balanced both pressures simultaneously, shaping an organ that served multiple purposes across an animal's lifetime. If such encounters truly occurred, they would rank among the most formidable displays in the Jurassic world. Two creatures weighing many tons, each wielding a reinforced column of bone, muscle, cartilage, and connective tissue, meeting in contests measured not by speed or agility, but by sheer momentum. The neck then becomes more than a feeding tool. It becomes a record of competition written directly into the skeleton itself. Color is among the most familiar features of any living animal. It is often the first thing the eye notices, whether it belongs to a bird crossing the sky, a deer standing among trees, or a lizard resting on a rock. Yet when it comes to Brontosaurus, color remains one of the deepest unknowns in its entire biology. The skeleton tells an extraordinary story. Bones reveal size, posture, growth, injury, and movement. Footprints preserve moments of travel. Teeth record feeding habits. Even the structure of blood circulation and respiration can sometimes be reconstructed from fossil evidence. Color exists in a different category. It depends on pigments and microscopic structures that rarely survive the passage of more than 150 million years. No Brontosaurus fossil has preserved direct evidence of skin pigmentation. As a result, every painted illustration, museum reconstruction, documentary model, and cinematic depiction represents an informed interpretation rather than a confirmed reality. The familiar greens, browns, grays, and earth tones, often associated with sauropods, arise from comparison with living animals rather than fossil proof. Some clues emerge from skin impressions discovered in other sauropods. These impressions reveal surfaces covered in scales of varying sizes, arranged in patterns that gave the skin texture rather than smoothness. Viewed up close, the body may have resembled a landscape of small pebbles, each scale catching sunlight differently as the animal moved through open country and woodland corridors. Looking toward modern ecosystems provides another line of reasoning. Large herbivores living in exposed environments frequently display countershading, with darker coloration across the back and lighter tones underneath. This arrangement reduces visual contrast created by sunlight and shadow, helping an animal blend more effectively into its surroundings. Deer, antelope, and many other species follow this pattern today. Applying that logic to Brontosaurus introduces an interesting complication. Camouflage serves a clear purpose when an animal can realistically avoid detection. Brontosaurus stood many meters tall, stretched across a length comparable to a city bus, and weighed many tons. Concealment may have offered limited advantages to an adult of such proportions. Predators were unlikely to overlook a creature occupying so much physical space. Once animals reach extraordinary size, evolutionary pressures sometimes shift toward communication rather than concealment. Large mammals, birds, and reptiles often carry markings that signal identity, health, maturity, or reproductive condition. Distinctive patterns can become useful when individuals must recognize one another across considerable distances. That possibility has inspired some researchers to speculate about display coloration. Sections of the neck, tail, or flanks may have carried contrasting patterns visible from afar. Subtle bands, darker patches, or even brighter display regions cannot be ruled out. The neck is particularly intriguing because it may have served roles extending beyond feeding. If social competition influenced neck evolution, visual signals displayed along its length could have communicated information before physical encounters ever occurred. No fossil currently confirms any of these possibilities. The evidence reaches a boundary and then fades. Stone preserves many details, though not every detail. At that frontier, scientific reconstruction becomes an exercise in probability rather than certainty. For Brontosaurus, color remains suspended between knowledge and imagination. The bones speak with remarkable clarity about much of its life, yet its appearance under the Jurassic sun belongs to a chapter that the rocks have chosen not to keep. Every species occupies a particular moment in Earth's history. Some persist for only a geological instant. Others endure for tens of millions of years, becoming so familiar to their environment that they seem woven into the landscape itself. Brontosaurus belonged to the latter group. For millions of years, it moved across floodplains, river systems, and forests of the late Jurassic, part of an ecological fabric that appeared enduring on the scale of any individual lifetime. Then, somewhere around 146 to 145 million years ago, Brontosaurus vanished from the fossil record. Its disappearance stands apart from the famous extinction that ended the reign of non-avian dinosaurs many millions of years later. No asteroid struck the planet at this moment. No singular catastrophe marks the final chapter of Brontosaurus. The evidence points toward a more gradual process, one unfolding across generations rather than days. The late Jurassic world was changing. Climate patterns shifted across continents, seasonal rainfall varied, river systems altered their courses over time, sea levels rose and fell, changing coastlines and influencing regional weather. Plant communities responded to these environmental adjustments, with some species expanding while others retreated. For animals dependent upon enormous quantities of vegetation every day, even modest ecological changes could accumulate into substantial challenges. Large herbivores exist within delicate balances. Despite their imposing size, their bodies require tremendous energy. Their feeding strategies often become tied to particular landscapes and plant distributions. A change in vegetation does not merely alter scenery, it reshapes the foundation of survival. During this same interval, the broader sauropod world was also evolving. Different lineages were diversifying and spreading into new ecological opportunities. Among them were the ancestors of the titanosaurs, a group that would become one of the dominant giant herbivore lineages of the Cretaceous. Their rise did not necessarily involve direct competition in a dramatic sense, yet evolutionary history often resembles a shifting mosaic. As some groups expand, others contract, responding to changing conditions in different ways. Brontosaurus belonged to the Diplodocid family, a lineage characterized by elongated necks, relatively light skulls, and specialized feeding strategies. Fossil evidence indicates that diplodocids as a whole declined during the latest Jurassic. By the beginning of the Cretaceous, they had largely disappeared. The fate of Brontosaurus therefore reflects a broader pattern rather than an isolated event affecting a single genus. Life histories may also have influenced that outcome. Brontosaurus invested heavily in growth, Individuals spent years reaching adult size and likely lived for many decades afterward. Such strategies can be highly successful in stable environments. Long lives allow repeated breeding opportunities and sustained ecological presence. Stability, however, is never guaranteed. When environmental conditions begin changing more rapidly than populations can adapt, traits that once promoted success can become constraints. A creature requiring extensive territory, abundant food resources, and long periods to replace generations possesses less flexibility than smaller, faster reproducing animals. Evolution operates across populations, and populations respond most effectively when change occurs at a pace they can track. No single fossil records the final Brontosaurus. No preserved landscape captures the last herd. What remains instead is a gradual fading from the geological record, a reminder that extinction often arrives not as a dramatic ending, but as a slow closing of possibilities, until a familiar presence is gone from the world it once helped shape. A living Brontosaurus was a moving system of muscle, blood, lungs, skin, nerves, and countless biological processes unfolding every moment of its life. None of that remains. The animal itself vanished long ago. What endures are traces transformed by geology, fragments carried across immense spans of time until they arrive in the hands of paleontologists. The journey begins after death. Bones resting within sediment become buried by layers of mud, sand, or floodplain deposits. Groundwater moves through those sediments, carrying dissolved minerals. Across millions of years, the original skeletal material changes atom by atom. Minerals replace organic components while preserving much of the structure. The result is fossilization, a process that creates stone replicas of once living tissue. This transformation explains why nearly everything known about Brontosaurus originates from bone. Hard tissues possess the durability required to survive burial, pressure, and deep time. Soft tissues rarely enjoy that advantage. Muscles decay, internal organs disappear, blood vessels collapse, skin usually leaves no trace. The living creature dissolves while its framework remains. Because of that imbalance, paleontology often resembles the reconstruction of a vanished building from its supporting beams alone. The skeleton provides remarkable information, yet entire categories of biology remain absent. Color, vocal structures, behavior, metabolism, and social interactions must be inferred indirectly, assembled from clues scattered across anatomy, geology, and comparison with living animals. Many of the most important Brontosaurus discoveries come from Wyoming and Utah within specific layers of the Morrison Formation deposited during the Kimmeridgian stage of the Late Jurassic. Those rocks preserve a world lost approximately 150 million years ago. River channels, floodplains, droughts, and seasonal changes all contributed to the burial conditions that eventually protected dinosaur remains from complete destruction. Among the most significant fossils is the holotype specimen of Brontosaurus excelsus, cataloged as Yale Peabody Museum specimen 1980. This skeleton serves as the defining reference for the species. Every discussion of Brontosaurus ultimately traces back to that foundational discovery. Its bones continue to provide information more than a century after they were first studied. New insights sometimes emerge from fossils long thought fully understood. During a later remounting of the holotype, researchers identified pneumatic cavities extending into the dorsal ribs. These air-filled spaces offered additional evidence for the extensive respiratory system associated with sauropods. Such findings demonstrate that fossils are not static sources of knowledge. Fresh technologies, new questions, and revised interpretations can reveal details overlooked by earlier generations. The Morrison Formation has yielded such an extraordinary concentration of dinosaur remains that entire institutions and protected landscapes grew around its fossils. At Dinosaur National Monument, visitors can stand before a cliff face where bones remain embedded within rock, preserving a direct connection between excavation site and ancient ecosystem. The stone wall resembles a page from Earth's history, still waiting to be fully read. Every mounted Brontosaurus displayed in a museum represents far more than a collection of fossils. Excavation crews uncover the bones, preparators remove surrounding rock, researchers compare fragments, test hypotheses, and reconstruct missing elements. Artists and scientists work together to transform incomplete remains into coherent representations of an extinct animal. Even after all that effort, uncertainty remains woven through every reconstruction. Bone preserves structure, proportions, and mechanical possibilities. Bone does not preserve the complete animal. What survives is evidence. The creature itself exists beyond reach, leaving behind a framework of stone and a series of questions that continue to guide discovery. A Brontosaurus bone may appear unchanged, resting in a museum drawer or mounted high above a gallery floor, yet the methods used to study it have transformed almost beyond recognition. The fossil itself remains the same object discovered in stone, but each generation brings new ways of extracting information from its structure. What once seemed like a collection of large bones has become a record of growth, physiology, movement, and life history. The first scientists who excavated Brontosaurus during the 1870s worked with little more than careful observation, measuring tools, notebooks, and comparison. Their achievements were extraordinary for their time, yet many of the details discussed today existed beyond the reach of available technology. Entire categories of evidence remained locked inside the fossils themselves. One of the most revealing modern techniques is bone histology. Researchers remove an extremely thin section from a fossil and examine it under a microscope. Within that slice lies a microscopic landscape of tissue organization, growth marks, blood vessel channels, and cellular patterns. These structures preserve a biological history written during the animal's lifetime. Growth rings can indicate age. Tissue types reveal developmental speed. Fibrolamellar bone, common in rapidly growing sauropods, helped demonstrate that Brontosaurus reached enormous size through sustained, accelerated growth unlike that of most living reptiles. Another breakthrough arrived through computed tomography scanning. Instead of cutting into valuable specimens, scientists can examine internal anatomy using imaging technology that penetrates the fossil while leaving it intact. Cavities, passages, and hidden structures emerge as digital cross-sections. Air-filled spaces associated with the respiratory system become visible. Neural canals can be measured. Internal architecture appears layer by layer, exposing details that earlier researchers could only speculate about. Engineering has contributed another powerful tool. Finite element analysis began as a method for evaluating stress in bridges, aircraft, and machinery. Paleontologists adapted it to extinct animals. Digital models of fossil bones can be subjected to simulated forces, allowing researchers to estimate how structures responded during life. A neck can be tested against impact. A limb can be evaluated under body weight. Feeding behavior, locomotion, and even proposed combat techniques can be explored through mathematical reconstruction. Chemical evidence adds another dimension. Isotope analysis examines variations in elements preserved within fossil material. These chemical signatures can provide clues about diet, environmental conditions, movement across landscapes, and body temperature regulation. Information once thought permanently lost may survive in subtle differences measured at the atomic level. Photogrammetry has expanded access to fossils across the world. Thousands of overlapping photographs are combined into highly accurate three-dimensional models. Researchers can rotate specimens, take measurements, compare bones, and share data internationally without transporting fragile originals. A fossil collected in one museum can be examined digitally by specialists on another continent within minutes. Many of the ideas explored throughout the story of Brontosaurus emerged from these modern approaches. Growth rate estimates, evidence for extensive air sacs, analyses of neck function, and refined reconstructions of anatomy all owe their existence to techniques unavailable when the animal was first named. The stone has not changed, the questions have. Each decade brings sharper tools, broader data sets, and new perspectives. Brontosaurus remains anchored in the late Jurassic, while the science surrounding it continues to move forward, revealing details that earlier generations could scarcely have imagined. Few scientific names have traveled as far beyond the boundaries of science as Brontosaurus. Long before most people could name a geological period or identify a fossil, they knew the thunder lizard. It entered public consciousness during the late 19th century and never truly left. Across generations, it became more than a dinosaur. It became a symbol, carrying ideas about prehistory, discovery, and the age of the Earth itself. Part of that story began at a moment when humanity was learning that the planet's history stretched far deeper than previously imagined. Fossils were revealing worlds that no living person had ever seen, populated by animals unlike anything walking the earth today. Among those discoveries, Brontosaurus stood apart. Its skeleton combined familiarity and strangeness in equal measure. Four sturdy legs suggested a land animal. A neck of astonishing length challenged expectations. Its sheer scale pushed beyond ordinary experience. Museum halls played a major role in shaping that relationship. Visitors entered enormous galleries and found themselves standing beneath mounted skeletons that seemed to continue forever. Children stared upward. Adults did the same. For many people, those encounters became their first direct connection to deep time. The animal transformed from a scientific description in a journal into a physical presence occupying real space. As paleontology expanded during the 20th century, Brontosaurus appeared almost everywhere. Illustrators painted it crossing prehistoric floodplains. Toy manufacturers molded it from plastic. Publishers placed it on book covers and classroom posters. Its silhouette became instantly recognizable, even to people with little interest in natural history. Entire generations learned the word before they learned much about dinosaurs themselves. Commercial culture adopted it as well. The green sauropod used by the Sinclair Oil Corporation became one of the most recognizable corporate mascots in North America. Drivers encountered the image at service stations across thousands of kilometers. The dinosaur migrated from museums and textbooks into everyday life, becoming part of the visual landscape. Popular entertainment strengthened that connection. Animated programs such as the Flintstones placed long-necked dinosaurs alongside fictional prehistoric families. Children's stories translated the animal into dozens of languages. Film, television, and educational media repeated the image so often that Brontosaurus became shorthand for dinosaurs in general. An unusual chapter followed when scientific revisions argued that Brontosaurus should instead be called Apatosaurus. Researchers adopted the revised classification, yet the public largely ignored the change. The older name remained deeply rooted in culture. Decades passed while museums, scientists, and popular audiences used different labels for what many believed was the same animal. When later research restored Brontosaurus as a valid genus, the announcement resonated far beyond academic circles. It felt less like the introduction of a new dinosaur and more like the return of an old acquaintance. Few extinct animals could have generated such a reaction. Part of the enduring appeal may rest in the name itself. Thunder lizard carries a rhythm that seems to match the image it evokes. The words suggest weight, distance, and movement across landscapes that vanished long ago. Even before learning any anatomy or taxonomy, people often understand something essential through the sound of the name alone. Across nearly a century and a half, Brontosaurus became a bridge between science and imagination. Its bones revealed a real animal. Its cultural journey revealed something equally enduring: humanity's fascination with worlds that existed long before our own. Across more than a century of debate, museum visitors, book readers, artists, and children continued using a name that much of the scientific community had set aside. Brontosaurus remained alive in public memory even while technical papers favored Apatosaurus. The story created a curious divide: one existing dinosaur carrying two identities depending on who was speaking. Then, in 2015, that divide narrowed in a way few expected. The turning point arrived through a comprehensive study led by paleontologist Emmanuel Chop and colleagues, published in the journal Peer J. Rather than relying on tradition or historical preference, the team approached the question through an enormous comparison of anatomy. Fossils from across the Diplodocid family were examined in painstaking detail. Bones were measured, coded, compared, and analyzed using methods unavailable to earlier generations of researchers. The scale of the project was extraordinary. Researchers evaluated 477 distinct anatomical characteristics across 81 individual specimens. Each feature became part of a larger pattern: the shape of vertebrae, proportions of limb elements, details of the shoulder region, ankle structure, and numerous other traits were assessed systematically. The goal was not to determine which name people preferred. The goal was to understand evolutionary relationships as accurately as possible. As the analysis progressed, a consistent picture emerged. Specimens traditionally assigned to Brontosaurus possessed combinations of features that repeatedly distinguished them from Apatosaurus. Differences appeared in the shoulder blade, the ankle bones, and the architecture of the neck vertebrae. No single characteristic carried the argument alone. Instead, many anatomical signals pointed in the same direction. The conclusion attracted worldwide attention. Brontosaurus was judged distinct enough to deserve recognition as its own genus. After decades spent as a synonym, the thunder lizard returned to formal scientific standing. For many outside paleontology, the announcement felt less like a revision and more like a restoration. The study extended beyond a single species. Fossils once known as Apatosaurus parvus and Eobrontosaurus yanapin were reassigned as Brontosaurus parvus and Brontosaurus yanapin. The genus itself became broader and more clearly defined, supported by a framework built from quantitative comparison rather than historical momentum. Within science, responses remained appropriately cautious. Taxonomy rarely reaches permanent consensus. New discoveries continue to alter classifications, and healthy disagreement is part of the process. Some paleontologists accepted the reclassification quickly. Others preferred additional evidence before fully embracing the revised arrangement. Such discussions reflected the normal rhythm of scientific inquiry, where conclusions remain open to testing and refinement. Outside academic circles, the reaction unfolded very differently. Newspapers, museums, television programs, and online communities embraced the news with unusual enthusiasm. Scientific papers often reshape specialist understanding while attracting little public notice. This one generated celebration. People who had never read a taxonomy study suddenly cared about dinosaur classification. That response revealed something larger than anatomy. For more than 100 years, the name Brontosaurus had persisted through cultural memory, illustrations, museum visits, and childhood fascination. Scientific terminology had changed, yet the thunder lizard remained firmly anchored in the imagination. When the 2015 study appeared, it did more than revise a classification. It reunited scientific language with a name that generations had never stopped believing belonged to one of the most famous animals ever discovered. There is a point at which size stops being an advantage and begins to create problems of its own. Every additional kilogram demands support, circulation, movement, and energy. Every increase in height changes the forces acting on bones and muscles. Gravity never relaxes its demands. For most land animals throughout Earth's history, those demands established boundaries that could not be crossed. Brontosaurus lived very near one of those boundaries. Its body was a collection of compromises shaped by physical law. The skeleton carried enormous mass, yet many bones were threaded with air-filled spaces that reduced weight without sacrificing strength. The neck stretched across distances that would challenge most vertebrates, supported by structures refined over millions of years. Even the skull reflected efficiency. Heavy jaws and elaborate chewing mechanisms would have added unnecessary mass at the far end of a very long lever. The circulatory system presents one of the most fascinating examples. Blood had to reach a head positioned several meters above the chest whenever the neck rose. Achieving that feat required pressures far beyond those experienced by most living animals. Researchers continue debating the exact cardiovascular solutions employed by large sauropods. Whatever the details, the system operated within a narrow range where circulation remained effective without creating damaging stress elsewhere in the body. Movement imposed another set of constraints. Larger animals generally move more efficiently over long distances, yet increasing mass also increases the consequences of injury. A stumble for a small mammal may be inconsequential. For a creature weighing many tons, mechanical failures become much more serious. The column-like limbs of Brontosaurus reveal a design focused on stability and support. Evolution favored reliability over speed. Feeding strategies were shaped by the same realities. A body of such scale required enormous quantities of vegetation every day. The long neck expanded feeding reach, allowing access to large volumes of plant matter without constant relocation. Energy saved through reduced movement could then be invested elsewhere. What appears at first glance to be an extraordinary anatomical feature also functioned as an elegant solution to a mathematical problem. The existence of Brontosaurus depended on conditions extending far beyond the animal itself. Jurassic ecosystems supplied abundant plant productivity across broad landscapes. Atmospheric composition differed from that of the present day. Climatic patterns created environments capable of supporting immense herbivore populations. Predator communities imposed pressures distinct from those experienced by large mammals today. These factors interacted over millions of years, creating circumstances in which giant sauropods could thrive. Change enough pieces of that larger system and the equation shifts. A different vegetation structure alters food availability. Modified climate patterns influence productivity. Alternative ecological relationships create new pressures. Gigantism on the scale achieved by Brontosaurus was not guaranteed by evolution. It emerged because many variables aligned simultaneously. That alignment makes Brontosaurus more than an example of an exceptionally large dinosaur. It represents a rare intersection of biology, environment, and physics. The animal stood near the upper limits of what a terrestrial vertebrate could become while remaining functional, mobile, and successful. Across the long history of life, countless lineages explored different paths. Few approached the dimensions reached by the giant sauropods. None have exceeded them in a comparable terrestrial form. Brontosaurus remains a reminder that evolution occasionally arrives at outcomes so extreme that they appear almost improbable. Yet for a span of geological time, they walked the earth as ordinary members of their world. A number written on a museum label can appear deceptively small: 155 million years. The words fit comfortably on a page, yet the reality behind them stretches far beyond ordinary experience. Human lives are measured in decades, civilizations count centuries. Even recorded history occupies only a thin sliver of the interval separating the present day from the age of Brontosaurus. Consider the span of our own species. Anatomically, modern humans emerged roughly 300,000 years ago. Every city, language, monument, kingdom, invention, and memory belongs within that comparatively brief interval. Set against 155 million years, the entire human story becomes a fraction so small that it nearly disappears. The distance between Brontosaurus and the first human is greater than the distance between the first human and the present by hundreds of times. Even within dinosaur history, Brontosaurus was not an early arrival or a final survivor. The broader lineage of non-avian dinosaurs endured for approximately 165 million years. When Brontosaurus wandered the floodplains of the Morrison ecosystem, dinosaur evolution already possessed a long past and still held a long future. Entire groups had risen and vanished before its appearance. Entire groups would flourish after its disappearance. The geography of the planet belonged to a different arrangement. Continents occupied positions unfamiliar to modern eyes. North America was still being shaped by tectonic forces whose consequences would unfold across immense intervals. The Atlantic Ocean existed only as a developing seaway, far narrower than the ocean known today. Regions that would eventually become Wyoming lay closer to the equator, experiencing climates unlike those of the modern American West. The Rocky Mountains had not yet emerged from the processes that would later raise them skyward. Looking upward would reveal another difference. The stars themselves were not fixed companions. Across 155 million years, the solar system traveled through the Milky Way, carrying Earth along a path measured in galactic distances. Individual stars shifted position relative to one another. Constellations familiar to modern observers had different shapes or had not yet formed. The sky above a Brontosaurus was connected to ours by physics, yet visually distinct in ways impossible to reconstruct perfectly. The bones that reached the present followed a journey almost as extraordinary as the animal's life. After death, remains settled into sediment, spread across floodplains and river channels. Layer upon layer accumulated above them. Minerals gradually replaced original biological material, preserving structural details while transforming bone into stone. Geological forces later lifted those buried deposits toward the surface. Wind, water, frost, and time then removed vast quantities of rock. Erosion acted for millions upon millions of years. exposing fragments that had rested underground since the Jurassic. A paleontologist kneeling beside a fossil encounters more than an animal. The specimen embodies a sequence of events extending across nearly unimaginable durations. Life, burial, fossilization, uplift, exposure, discovery, and study become linked within a single object. Brontosaurus, therefore, represents more than a creature from a distant age. It reveals the scale of the planet itself. Earth is old enough for landscapes to transform repeatedly, for oceans to open and widen, for mountains to rise and wear away, and for living beings to pass into stone before eventually meeting minds capable of wondering who they were. Imagine a stretch of time so long that entire mountain ranges can rise, wear away, and leave scarcely a trace of their former height. Against that backdrop, the life of a single Brontosaurus might seem fleeting. Yet the species itself endured for millions of years, generation following generation, crossing the floodplains of a world that no longer exists. Those animals are gone. No herd remains beyond the horizon. No tracks are being pressed into fresh Jurassic mud. Their disappearance was not the consequence of a single dramatic ending, but of a planet that continued changing after they were gone. The climate shifted, ecosystems reorganized, and evolutionary pathways opened for different forms of life. The conditions that once supported Brontosaurus belonged to a specific chapter of Earth's history, and that chapter closed long ago. Still, existence leaves marks. For roughly 10 million years, Brontosaurus occupied a place within the living fabric of the Morrison landscape. Individuals emerged from eggs, passed through years of rapid growth, joined moving groups, browsed among forests and river corridors, survived droughts and seasonal change, and eventually reached the end of lives that may have stretched across many decades. Countless animals completed that cycle. Their days unfolded without knowledge that future creatures would one day search for evidence of their presence. What remains from those lives appears fragmentary at first glance: a footprint hardened in sediment, a vertebra buried in a floodplain deposit, a sequence of bones preserved where a body came to rest. Yet each discovery carries information across an immense gulf of time. A track records movement, bone tissue records growth, tooth wear records feeding. The earth retained pieces of their story, scattered through stone like pages separated from a forgotten volume. There is a particular wonder in the chain of events required for those pages to survive. An animal had to die in the right environment. Sediment had to arrive before weather and scavengers erased the remains. Minerals had to preserve structural details. Geological forces had to protect the fossils from destruction. Millions of years later, erosion had to expose them at the surface. Finally, a human being had to notice a shape in the rock and recognize its significance. Any missing step might have erased the evidence forever. Geology determines what survives, yet the creature preserved within that process was no accident. Brontosaurus emerged from a lineage shaped across hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary change. Every generation inherited adaptations refined by countless ancestors. Lighter bones, efficient breathing structures, specialized feeding anatomy, and extraordinary growth patterns accumulated over spans of time difficult to comprehend. The result was an animal capable of reaching immense size while remaining fully integrated into the rhythms of its environment. That achievement gives weight to the simple statement that Brontosaurus existed. Existence at such scale meant more than occupying space. It meant participating in an ecosystem, influencing landscapes, shaping vegetation, and becoming part of a living world whose details can now only be reconstructed from traces. A century of life, repeated across untold numbers of individuals, left an imprint that survived long after the animals themselves vanished. The thunder lizard is absent from the modern world, yet its reality remains preserved in stone, in scientific understanding, and in the enduring record of a planet that remembers far more than it seems. A fossil discovery does not end a story. In many ways, it begins one. Across the outcrops of the Morrison Formation, field crews still search slopes, gullies, and weathered cliffs for fragments emerging from stone. New material attributed to Brontosaurus continues to appear, sometimes as isolated bones, sometimes as specimens capable of reshaping long accepted assumptions. The animal remains physically absent from the world, yet scientifically unfinished. That unfinished quality is part of its enduring fascination. The reclassification published in 2015 resolved one question while revealing many others. Researchers continue examining variation among specimens, relationships between species, patterns of growth, and details of anatomy that earlier generations lacked the tools to investigate. Each new study alters the picture slightly. A vertebra may reveal a feature previously overlooked. A digital scan may expose an internal structure hidden for more than a century. A statistical analysis may rearrange relationships among animals once thought fully understood. Knowledge accumulates through these adjustments. Rarely does a single discovery transform everything at once. More often, understanding advances through a long sequence of refinements, each one bringing the living animal into sharper focus. The fossil remains unchanged, embedded in stone exactly as before. Interpretation continues to evolve around it. This is the peculiar character of deep time research. Brontosaurus cannot be observed directly. No behavior can be recorded. No sound can be measured. Scientists work with traces, comparing evidence, testing ideas, revising conclusions, and returning repeatedly to the same bones with new questions. Across generations of researchers, a conversation unfolds between the present and a world separated from us by 155 million years. In natural history museums scattered across multiple continents, visitors encounter the results of that conversation. Towering skeletons rise above gallery floors. Long necks curve overhead. Children pause beneath them, often before they understand geology, evolution, or the immensity of planetary history. They look upward and recognize scale before they possess words for it. Something immense once lived here. That impression arrives immediately and requires no explanation. The feeling corresponds closely with reality. Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years old. Life has existed for roughly 3.7 billion years. Within that span, Brontosaurus occupied only a brief interval, perhaps around 10 million years, measured against planetary history. Even that success was temporary. Yet for those millions of years, the animal was entirely real, feeding, growing, reproducing, and shaping the ecosystems around it. The distance separating us from that world exceeds ordinary comprehension. Oceans changed, mountains rose, species appeared and vanished, continents shifted position. Through all of it, evidence persisted. Enough remained for human beings to reconstruct a creature they would never witness alive. We know its name. We know the architecture of its skeleton. We know something of its growth, its movement, its biology, and the environment it inhabited. Such knowledge is incomplete, yet it is profoundly meaningful. Science does not erase distance, it builds bridges across it. Somewhere within the remaining rock of the Morrison Formation, Additional bones still wait for discovery. They have rested there through spans of time longer than human history. Their story continues, piece by piece, and the thunder lizard remains part of an ongoing dialogue between the living world and the deep past that shaped it.